Krishna. It's been a while since read from the Krishna book, the summary study of the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. We read most of it, and then this chapter is called Prayers by the Personified Vedas, which is, it's a really heavy chapter. It's very detailed, scientific explanation of things. And up to this point, mostly it's been pastimes. So now this Prayers Personified Vedas kind of got partway into the chapter and then went on to something else. But it's time to come back. And Prayers by the Personified Vedas are the prayers that are, well, here's what happens. See, the Srimad Bhagavatam is the recorded conversation between Maharaj Parīkṣit asking questions of Śukadeva Gosvāmī. Maharaj Parīkṣit is going to be leaving his body in a few days, and he wants to know, what does a person do when they're about to die? And Śukadeva Gosvāmī is explaining, well, they hear about Krishna. That's what they do. They hear and prepare. So that's the Bhagavatam, is that conversation. And within that conversation, there are other conversations, because Śukadeva Gosvāmī refers back to when Maharaj Parīkṣit asks a question. Śukadeva Gosvāmī refers back to another conversation that took place on another planet millions of years ago when they asked the same question. Like that. So it's conversations within conversations, but the main conversation is Śukadeva Gosvāmī, Maharaj Parīkṣit. Actually, that's not the main conversation. What we have is Sutta Goswami speaking to the sages at Naimisharanya, who wanted to know, where have religious principles gone in this dark age? Where have the religious principles gone? And Sutta Goswami had just come from the assembly where Maharaj Parīkṣit and Śukadeva Goswami were conversing about Krishna. So what we have is Sutta Goswami relating to the sages at Naimisharanya what he heard in the conversation between Maharaj Parīkṣit and Śukadeva Goswami. Bhagavatam. So Sutta Goswami is telling the sages that King Parīkṣit inquired from Śukadeva Goswami about a very important topic in understanding transcendental subject matter. And this is where this Prayers by Personified Vedas takes off, from this question. So this was the question Maharaj Parīkṣit asked Śukadeva Goswami. He said, since Vedic knowledge generally deals with the subject matter of the three qualities of the material world, how then can it approach the subject matter of transcendence, which is beyond the approach of the three material modes? Since the mind is material, and the vibration of words is a material sound, how can Vedic knowledge, expressing by material sound and thoughts of the mind, approach transcendence? Description of a subject matter necessitates describing its source of emanation, its qualities and its activities. Such description can be possible only by thinking with a material mind and vibrating material words. Although Brahman, or the absolute truth, has no material qualities. Our power of speaking does not go beyond material qualities. How then can Brahman, the absolute truth, spirit, be described by your words? I do not see how it is possible to understand transcendence from such expressions of material sound. So it takes off from there. And Śukadeva Gosvāmī has a lot to say about that. The process of understanding transcendence, or the supreme spiritual truth, spiritual absolute truth, personality of Godhead. And there's a lot that goes on there. And I'm not in a position to summarize everything they discussed, but we did read it at one point, and now we're at for the sake of continuing on, we'll come back eventually and read this again, but for all intent and purposes, just to keep going and not getting bogged down, we're somewhere near, not quite the middle of the chapter. Probably about a quarter of the way through. And so here, Śukadeva Gosvāmī is discussing the soul and the supersoul. And he says, the Supreme Lord, or the Supersoul, is said to be Eka Ras. Eka means one, and Ras means mellow. The transcendental position of the Supreme Lord is that of eternity, bliss, and full knowledge. His position of Eka Ras does not change in the slightest when he becomes a witness and advisor to the individual soul in each individual body. So the prayers, how is this the prayers? Well, when King Parīkṣit asked that question, Śukadeva Gosvāmī referred to a similar question that had been asked on another planet a long, long time ago. And the way that was answered referred to the prayers of the Personified Vedas. The statements of Personified Vedas give clear evidence that Vedic literature is presented only for understanding Krishna. It is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita through all the Vedas, it's Krishna alone who has to be understood. And so the statements of the Personified Vedas are being quoted. And these are prayers that are offered to Krishna when it's time for him to wake from his mystic slumber, his expansion as Mahavishnu, resting in at the time of dissolution. He takes and he goes to sleep. And then when it's time for everything, for him to wake up and everything be manifest again. So these are the prayers that are offered at that time. So they're being quoted here and being discussed. Hare Krishna, I think. Anyway, the prayers of Personified Vedas to help address this issue of Krishna being what is actually to be known by the Vedas, not just elevation through the modes. So the individual soul, beginning from Lord Brahma down to the ant, exhibits his spiritual potency according to his present body. To exhibit your spiritual potency according to your present body. The demigods are in the same category with the individual souls in the bodies of the human beings, or in the bodies of lower animals. Intelligent persons, therefore, do not worship different demigods who are simply infinitesimal representatives of Krishna manifesting in conditioned bodies. Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day, how by performing sacrifices and austerities and giving in charity and doing everything right, then we can elevated and go to the higher planets. And then in order to go to the higher planets, you need a suitable body. And that body will be very beautiful. It doesn't get sick. It's very attractive. It may have different talents and abilities, musical abilities or dancing abilities or poetic abilities or whatever abilities. You get endowed with good karma. But it's still a material body. No matter how beautiful it is, no matter how attractive it is, it's a material body. And it doesn't last. Intelligent persons, therefore, do not worship different demigods who are simply infinitesimal representatives of Krishna manifesting in conditioned bodies. The individual soul can exhibit his power and potencies only in proportion to the shape and constitution of the body. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, however, can exhibit his full potencies in any shape or form without any change. The Mayavadi philosopher's thesis that God and the individual soul are one and the same cannot be accepted because the individual soul has to develop his power and potencies according to the development of different types of bodies. The individual soul in the body of a baby cannot show the full power and potency of a grown man, but the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, even when lying on the lap of his mother as a baby, could exhibit his full potency and power by killing Putana and other demons who tried to attack him. Therefore, the spiritual potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is said to be ekaras, or without change. That's why the Lord, in his different incarnations, he can appear in different forms. Half lion, half man. Matsya, the fish. Kurma, the turtle. Vraha, the boar. Hayagriva, the horse. But it's Krishna in full potencies. He's not limited by those forms. They don't limit him like they would someone, a living entity who took birth as a fish or a tortoise or a horse or a boar. They would be limited, but it's not like that with Krishna. In other words, only liberated souls can worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Less intelligent Mayavadis take to the worship of demigods, thinking that the demigods and the Supreme Personality of Godhead are on the same level. The Personified Vedas continued to offer their obeisances. They're trying to wake the Lord up here. Dear Lord, they prayed, after many, many births, those who have actually become wise take to the worship of your lotus feet and complete knowledge. This is also confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita, wherein the Lord says that after many, many births, a great soul, or Mahatma, surrenders unto the Lord, knowing well that Vasudeva, Krishna, is the cause of all causes. The Vedas continued. As has already been explained, since our mind, intelligence, and senses have been given to us by God, when these instruments are actually purified, there is no alternative but to engage them all in devotional service of the Lord. A living entity's entrapment in different species of life is due to the misapplication of his mind, intelligence, and senses in material activities. Various kinds of bodies are awarded as the result of a living entity's actions, and they are created by the material nature according to the living entity's desire. Because a living entity desires and deserves a particular kind of body, it is given to him by the material nature under the order of the Supreme Lord. It's so good to be reminded of the actual situation and to keep this understanding forefront and refreshed. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, it's explained that under the control of superior authority, a living entity is put within the semen of a male and injected into the womb of a particular female in order to develop a particular type of body. A living entity utilizes his senses, intelligence, mind, etc. in a specific way of his own choosing, and thus develops a particular type of body within which he becomes encaged. In this way, the living entity becomes situated in different species of life, either in a demigod, human, animal body, according to different situations and circumstances. It is explained in the Vedic literatures that the living entities entrapped in different species of life are part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. The Mayavadi philosophers mistake the living entity for the Paramatma, who is actually sitting with the living entity as a friend. That there's two within the heart. There's expansion of the Lord as Paramatma, Shridakshay Vishnu, and the living entity themselves. There's actually two there. Because the Paramatma, the localized aspect of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the individual living entity are both within the body, a misunderstanding sometimes takes place that there's no difference between the two. But there is a definite difference between the individual soul and the super soul, and it is explained in the Varaha Purana as follows. The Supreme Lord has two kinds of parts and parcels. The living entity is called Vibhanamsa, and the Paramatma, or the plenary expansion of the Lord, is called Svamsa. So Vibhanamsa is the jiva, and Svamsa is the expansion, the plenary part and parcel, the Vishnu part, the Paramatma. The Svamsa, plenary expansion of the Supreme Lord, is as powerful as the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself. Wow. Let's do that again. The Paramatma, the Svamsa, plenary expansion of the Supreme Personality, is as powerful as the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself. There is not even the slightest difference between the potency of the Supreme Person and that of His plenary expansion as Paramatma. But the Vibhanamsa, the jivas, the Vibhanamsa parts and parcels possess only a minute portion of the potencies of the Lord. The Narayana Pancharatra states that the living entities who are marginal potency of the Supreme Lord are undoubtedly of the same quality of spiritual existence as the Lord Himself, but they are prone to be tinged with the material qualities. Because he is prone to be subjected to the influence of material qualities, the minute living entity is called jiva. Sometimes the Supreme Personality of Godhead is also known as Shiva, the all-auspicious. So the difference between Shiva and Jiva is that the all-auspicious personality of Godhead is never affected by material qualities, whereas the minute portions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are prone to be affected by the qualities of material nature. It's really heavy stuff. It's like you're going along with Krishna book and kidnapping Rukmini and meeting the residents of Vrindavan. Draupadi meets the queens. You know, it's all like story and people doing things and pastimes, and then you hit this chapter and it's like okay. Well, that's what Maharaj Parīkṣit did. He was hearing about all these different pastimes from Śukadeva Gosvāmī, and then he asked the question, how is it possible to access transcendence with material mind and material sounds? And the Vedas, they mostly deal with the three modes of material nature. So how? And this is what he's getting. He's getting, Śukadeva Gosvāmī is referring to this conversation, or these prayers that were offered to the Lord when he wakes up, where it's almost like the Bhagavad Gita kind of thing, where it's going right back to square one, and you're not this body. Okay, the supersoul within the body of a particular living entity, although a plenary portion of the Lord, is worshipable by the individual living entity. Great sages have therefore concluded that the process of meditation is designed so that the individual living entity may concentrate his attention on the lotus feet of the supersoul form, Vishnu. That is the real form of samadhi. The living entity cannot become liberated from material entanglement by his own effort. He must therefore take to the devotional service of the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, or the supersoul within himself. Śukadeva Gosvāmī, the great commentator on Srimad Bhagavatam, has composed a nice verse in this regard, the purport of which is as follows. This is Śukadeva Gosvāmī, who has made some commentary on the Bhagavatam. My dear Lord, I'm eternally your part and parcel, but I have been entrapped by the material potencies, which are also an emanation from you. As the cause of all causes, you have entered my body as the supersoul, and I have the prerogative to enjoy the supreme blissful life of knowledge along with you. Therefore, my dear Lord, please order me to render you loving service so that I can again be brought to my original position of transcendental bliss. Great personalities understand that a living entity entangled in this material world cannot become freed by his own efforts. With firm faith and devotion, such great personalities engage themselves in rendering transcendental loving service to the Lord. That is the verdict of the Personified Vedas. The Personified Vedas continued. Dear Lord, it is very difficult to achieve perfect knowledge of the absolute truth. Your Lordship is so kind to the fallen souls that you appear in different incarnations and execute different activities. You appear even as an historical personality of this material world, and your pastimes are very nicely described in Vedic literatures. Such pastimes are as attractive as the ocean of transcendental bliss. People in general have a natural inclination to read narrations in which ordinary jivas are glorified. But when they become attracted by the Vedic literatures, which delineate your eternal pastimes, they actually dip into the ocean of transcendental bliss. As a fatigued man feels refreshed by dipping into a reservoir of water, so the conditioned soul, who is very much disgusted with material activities, becomes refreshed and forgets all the fatigue of material activities simply by dipping into the transcendental ocean of your pastimes. And eventually, he merges in the ocean of transcendental bliss. The most intelligent devotees, therefore, do not take to any means of self-realization except devotional service and constant engagement in the 9 different processes of devotional life, especially hearing and chanting. When hearing and chanting about your transcendental pastimes, your devotees do not care even for the transcendental bliss derived from liberation or from merging into the existence of the Supreme. Such devotees are not interested even in so-called liberation, and certainly they have no interest in material activities, for elevation to the heavenly planets, for sense gratification. Pure devotees seek only the association of Paramahamsas, or great liberated devotees, so that they continually hear and chant about your glories. For this purpose, the pure devotees are prepared to sacrifice all comforts of life, even giving up material comfort of family life and so-called society, friendship, and love. Those who have tasted the nectar of devotion by relishing the transcendental vibration of chanting your glories. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Do not care for any other spiritual bliss or for material comforts, which appear to the pure devotee to be less important than the straw in the street. The Personified Vedas continue. Dear Lord, when a person is able to purify his mind, senses, and intelligence by engaging himself in devotional service in full Krishna consciousness, his mind becomes his friend. Otherwise, his mind is always his enemy. When the mind is engaged in devotional service of the Lord, it becomes the intimate friend of the living entity, because the mind can then think of the Supreme Lord always. Your Lordship is eternally dear to the living entity, so when the mind is engaged in thought of you, one immediately feels the great satisfaction for which he has been hankering life after life. When one's mind is thus fixed on the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one does not take to any kind of inferior worship or inferior process of self-realization. By attempting to worship a demigod, or by taking to any other process of self-realization, the living entity becomes a victim of the cycle of birth and death, and no one can estimate how much the living entity becomes degraded by entering abominable species of life, such as cats and dogs. Srila Narottam Das Thakur has sung that persons who do not take to the devotional service of the Lord, but are attracted by the process, philosophical speculation, fruit of activities, drink the poisonous results of such actions. Such persons are forced to take birth in different species of life and are forced to adopt obnoxious practices like meat eating and intoxication. Materialistic persons generally worship the transient material body and forget the welfare of the spirit soul within the body. Some take shelter of materialistic science to improve bodily comforts, and some take to the worship of demigods in order to be promoted to the heavenly planets. Their goal in life is to make the material body comfortable while forgetting the interest of the spirit soul. Such persons are described in the Vedic literature as suicidal, because attachment for the material body and its comforts forces the living entity to wander through the process of birth and death perpetually and suffer the material pangs as a matter of course. The human form of life is a chance for one to understand his position, and the most intelligent persons take to devotional service just to engage the mind, senses, and body in the service of the Lord without deviation. The Personified Vedas continued. Dear Lord, there are many mystic yogis who are very learned and deliberate in achieving the highest perfection of life. They engage themselves in the yogic process of controlling the life air within the body, concentrating the mind upon the form of Vishnu, and controlling the senses very rigidly. They practice the yoga system, but even after much laborious austerity, penance, and regulation, they achieve the same destinations as persons who are inimical toward you. In other words, both the yogis and great wise philosophical speculators ultimately attain the impersonal Brahman effulgence, which is also automatically attained by demons who are regular enemies of the Lord. Demons like Kamsa, Shishupal, and Dantavakra also attain the Brahman effulgence because they're constantly meditating upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yeah, that came up in a conversation the other day. And one of the ladies, it was a ladies group, and she was very upset that she had read that the Mayavadis, I think it was in Ishopanishad, they go to the lowest planets and they can't see the light, and it's like kind of being like damned, you know. And she was very upset about that. Like, well, how can we have to help them? How can they be helped? This sweet lady. And I was remembering hearing this, that how the mental speculators, they are like the Mayavadis are mental speculators. And they try to attain perfection by mental powers. And the highest you can go by your own mental powers is that you're not your body, you're spirit, and it's impersonal. So they reach the Brahman effulgence, where they're spiritual. But great yogis go there too, and so do the demons, who are killed by Krishna, because they're always meditating on Krishna, but they're not meditating in devotion, but they're always meditating on Krishna. So they also get liberation into the Brahmajyoti. So they're all hanging out there together. The yogis, the Mayavadis, the demons, that's where they go. I tried to share that with that nice devotee, and she felt a little bit better. Oh, okay, so that's where they go. Oh, all right. And she felt a little bit. And then I said, they can't stay there forever. They do come back down and get another opportunity at some point to actually, become Krishna conscious. But they can stay there for quite a while. Women, such as the gopis, were attached to Krishna and captivated by his beauty, and their mental concentration on Krishna was provoked by lust. They wanted to be embraced by the arms of Krishna, which resembled the beautiful round shape of a snake. Similarly, there are the Vedic hymns, and we also simply concentrate our minds on the lotus feet of your Lordship. Women like the gopis concentrate upon you, dictated by lust, and we concentrate upon your lotus feet to go back home, back to Godhead. your enemies also concentrate upon you, thinking always how to kill you. And the yogis undertake great penances and austerities just to attain your impersonal effulgence. All these different persons, although concentrating their minds in different ways, achieve spiritual perfection according to their different perspectives, because you are equal to all your devotees. Śukadeva Gosvāmī has composed a nice verse in this regard. So Prabhupada's quoting Śukadeva Gosvāmī. My dear Lord, to be engaged always in thinking of your lotus feet is very difficult. It is possible by great devotees who have already achieved love for you and are engaged in transcendental loving service. My dear Lord, I wish that my mind also may be engaged somehow or other in your lotus feet, at least for some time. So that's a prayer by Śukadeva Gosvāmī. The attainment of spiritual perfection by different spiritualists is explained in the Bhagavad Gita, wherein the Lord says that He grants the perfection the devotee desires in proportion to the devotee's surrender unto Him. As they surrender to me, I reward them accordingly. The impersonalists, yogis, and enemies of the Lord enter into the Lord's transcendental effulgence. But personalists who are following in the footsteps of the inhabitants of Vrindavan, or strictly following the path of devotional service, are elevated to the personal abode of Krishna, Goloka, Vrindavan, or to the Vaikuntha planets. Both the impersonalists and the personalists enter into the spiritual realm or the spiritual sky, but impersonalists are giving their place in the impersonal Brahman effulgence, whereas the personalists are given a position in Vaikuntha planets or in the Vrindavan planet according to their desire to serve the Lord in different mellows. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. The Personified Vedas stated that persons who are born after the creation of this material world cannot understand the existence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead by manipulating their material knowledge. Just as a person born in a particular family cannot understand the position of his great-grandfather who lived before the birth of the recent generation, we are unable to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayan or Krishna, who exists eternally in the spiritual world. In the 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, it is clearly said, the Supreme Person who lives eternally in the spiritual kingdom of God, Sanatana Dham, can be approached only by devotional service. As for the material creation, Brahma is the first created person. Before Brahma, there was no living creature within the material world. It was void and dark until Brahma was born on the lotus flower, sprouted from the abdomen of Garbhodakshai Vishnu. Garbhodakshai Vishnu is an expansion of Karanadakshai Vishnu, or Mahavishnu. Karanadakshai Vishnu is an expansion of Shankarshan, and Shankarshan is an expansion of Balaram. Balaram is an immediate expansion of Lord Krishna. After the creation of Brahma, the two kinds of demigods were born. Demigods like the four brothers Shanaka, Sanatana, Sanandana, and Sanatkumar, who are representatives of the renunciation in the world, and demigods like Marichi and their descendants, who are meant to enjoy this material world. There are two different kinds of demigods. Some are representatives of renunciation of the world, and others are for enjoying the material world. From these two kinds of demigods were gradually manifested all living entities, including human beings. Thus, any living creature within this material world, including Brahma, all the demigods, and all the Rakshasas, are to be considered modern. This means that they were all recently born. Therefore, just as a person recently born in a family cannot understand the situation of his distant forefather, so anyone within this material world cannot understand the position of the Supreme Lord in the spiritual world, because the material world has only recently been created. Although they have a long duration of existence, all the manifestations of the material world, namely time elements, living entities, the Vedas, the gross and subtle elements, are all created at some point. Anything manufactured within this created situation or accepted as a means to understanding the original source of creation is considered modern. Therefore, by the process of self-realization or God-realization through fruitive activities, philosophical speculation, mystic yoga, one cannot actually approach the supreme source of everything. When the creation is completely terminated, when there is no existence of the Vedas, no existence of material time, no existence of the gross and subtle material elements, and when all living entities are in the non-manifested stage resting within Narayan, then all these manufactured processes become null and void and cannot act. Devotional service, however, is eternally going on in the spiritual world. Therefore, the only factual process of self-realization or God-realization is devotional service. And if one takes to this process, he takes to the real process of God-realization. Srila Śukadeva Gosvāmī has therefore composed a verse in this regard, which conveys the idea that the supreme source of everything, the supreme personality of Godhead, is so great and unlimited that it's not possible for a living entity to understand him by any material acquisition. Everyone should therefore pray to the Lord to be engaged in his devotional service eternally, so that by the grace of the Lord, one can understand the supreme source of creation. The supreme source of creation, the Supreme Lord, reveals himself only to the devotees. In the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says to Arjuna, "My dear Arjuna, because you are my devotee, and because you are my intimate friend, I shall therefore reveal to you the process of understanding me." In other words, the supreme source of creation, the supreme personality of Godhead, cannot be understood by our own endeavor. We have to please him with devotional service, and then he will reveal himself to us. Then we can understand him to some extent. There are different kinds of philosophers who have tried to understand the supreme source by their mental speculation. There are generally 6 kinds of mental speculators, and they're called Saddarshana. All these philosophers are impersonalists and are known as Mayavadis. Every one of them has tried to establish his own opinion, although they all have later compromised and stated that all opinions lead to the same goal and that every opinion is therefore valid. According to the prayers of the Personified Vedas, however, none of them are valid, because their process of knowledge is created within the temporary material world. They have all missed the real point. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, or the Absolute Truth, can be understood only by devotional service. So then Prabhupada is going to go on and discuss these different groups of Mayavadis in great detail. From what I understand, this particular section of the 10th canto of Bhagavatam is really just a few verses. But in Prabhupada's summary study, he has expanded it out to it's like, I don't know how many pages it is, 100 pages of very detailed discussion. Jai Srila Prabhupada. So that's where that is. Ah, Krishna. Let's see if I can find this before. It was interesting about being modern. Anything that appears after the creation of the material world is considered modern. And so cannot understand by their own abilities what took place before the creation, because they weren't there. That's ancient, this is modern. Interesting way to discuss it. I wouldn't have thought using the word modern. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Rama, Hare Rama. One class of philosophy. Well, I'll find it later. Oh, there it is. Okay, good deal. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna.